Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Gen Z Student Agency, Voice, and Choice. My name is Ashley Hemmy. I'm the Manager of Program Engagement at American Student Assistance. ASA is a national nonprofit focused on career exploration and readiness for students as early as middle school. We help students learn about themselves, about their options, and make informed decisions about their futures through digital programs, partnerships, and advocacy efforts as well. So I'm thrilled to be here today with this phenomenal panel of leaders in the education space, across the education space, to talk about how we can involve students in their own learning. So there's a lot of research out there about middle school and high school students wanting their voices heard. So that involves their own learning, but then also national and global issues. In fact, 67% of Gen Z said that they don't want anyone to really tell them what to do about their future planning. Instead, they want to be active participants, and they want to be decision makers in their own learning. And that involves their career learning as well. So during this discussion, we're going to talk about student-centered approaches to career readiness. And that involves student agency. So what we mean by agency here is empowering students to have ownership and responsibility over their own learning, and also giving students voice and choice. And so we're going to get into a range of experiential experiences and learning opportunities for students as early as middle school, and Ed will share as early as elementary school, to learn about how they can form their own identities, learn about their own identities, and all the education and career opportunities out there. Before we really get into the dialogue, which I'm really excited about, and this is my former fifth grade teacher self coming out here, I would love to do a round robin of intros. So just a real quick name, position, organization, and like a sentence, like a snippet, which I know is hard, but you'll have plenty of time to kind of share. So Ed, if you can start off the round robin.
Hi, good afternoon. Ed Hidalgo. I'm the Chief Innovation and Engagement Officer for the Cajon Valley Union School District. And my one blurb would be my mission statement, which is to help every child know that there's a place in the world for them.
I'm Stephanie Simpson. I'm the CEO of the Association for Middle Level Education. So we represent tens of thousands of middle grades educators, which we define as those who work with young students aged 10 to 15.
Shaun, McAlmont. I'm the CEO of NINJIO.com, which is a cybersecurity awareness training company. I've spent 30 years working in adult education, and most recently had an amazing experience working in K through 12, using some of the lessons learned in adult education to help student career development.
Awesome, yeah. My name is Dan Hack. I am the founder and president of Allelo. My co-founders and I, who actually just walked in, we built a discussion platform focused on creating vibrant discussions among students, specifically between 6th and 12th grade. I'm also part of Gen Z, so excited to add that to this panel here.
Awesome. So Shaun, I'd love for you to start us off. You just kind of mentioned you have vast experiences in K-12 and adult learning. Can you share a little bit more about those experiences and about how adult learning and career education, which has been a common practice and conversation for decades, translates to K-12?
Yeah, you know, I've had experience working in skill development in a number of areas. The skilled trades, automotive technology, technology itself, software development training, et cetera. And one of the things that we've learned about training adults is understanding the why behind the training. I mean, we're all pressed for time. We've got amazing life circumstances. We work. And when training's put in front of us for compliance, for example, we all sort of bristle at it because it just kind of falls into this category where it's not really motivating us to do it. We have to do it. But when the adult is motivated by training that has a clear outcome that can benefit their life, they are engaged. And engagement is the key. So over time, we found that experiential learning, working on case studies, project-based learning, et cetera, help the adult engage in that learning. And so if you think about the statement that says, look, if you tell me something, I'm not going to remember it. If you show it to me, I might remember it, but if you involve me, I'll understand it, is at the heart of adult learning. So what I've done, 25 years of that, but 5 years working in K through 12, and as you said earlier, introducing middle school and high school students to some of those components of adult learning. And we were amazed that middle school students grab a hold of understanding what's happening in industry better than we ever imagined, working in virtual teams, working in project-based learning and experiential learning, and then adding career and technical content throughout their journey. It's amazing what it's done for them. And we had a program at Stride, K-12, where we introduced that, we tested the concept, and that program grew from literally 0 students to about 40,000 students in 3 years, just based on introducing students to the modern workplace, skill development that they needed to get today, to give them more options so that they could make decisions about their path, which could take a number of different twists and turns. But just amazing how they grasped some of those adult learning techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just talking about middle school career exploration, usually when you hear career readiness, you're thinking high school and then beyond high school. But here we're talking about middle schoolers learning about careers. And so Stephanie, you are CEO of AMLE, so you talk to middle grades, educators all over the country. What does career exploration and students' agency look like at the middle grades level? I know Shaun touched on this a little bit, so I'm hoping you'll expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about that they're these naturally curious explorers, because they are in the midst of the most profound developmental phase of their lives other than 0 to 3. So they are actively wanting to develop their identities. And so when we think about student choice, too often it's, okay, you have the choice between A and B. You can study this language or that language. You can explore this career or that career. But instead, that's a stifled choice. It doesn't help the student who's interested in C. So instead, we should be thinking about exploration from inviting them to ask questions about their own personal and societal, questions that they have, to develop answers, to be naturally curious explorers. So when we talk with educators, we talk a lot about it's not choice in that it's a choice between things, but instead this period of exploration.
Yeah, I love that. Exploration being key there. So Cajon Valley Union School District is like a model of what district-wide implementation of career exploration looks like. And that's like the journey from K through 12. If you had a chance to visit the school tour yesterday, it's amazing. If not, I encourage you to check them out. But Ed, can you expand more on what Cajon does and what that looks like?
Sure, thank you. And I totally agree with my panelists here around that topic of identity and well-being is baked in and core to the work that we're doing. Because the self that a person makes themselves into is a function of language. And if you don't have that language, then you don't have it. And many of you may not even have that language today. And certainly young people don't have that language. So at the core of our work is a career development framework that's called the Mission of Me. And it focuses on self-awareness, understanding our unique strengths, interests, and workplace values, understanding the journey, which is academic and career opportunities that are available to young people, to answer that question: how does a child aspire to a career they don't know exists? And then the third leg of that stool is my story. Every child should be able to tell their unique story. And if for no other reason, that first question you're going to get from HR is, tell me about yourself. And you all hate that question. But we're equipping young people, starting in the earliest grades, to be able to tell their unique stories. And we ground the language in interests. And so we use Dr. Holland's framework of the RIASEC. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you may not. For those of you who are not, it is the most researched of all vocational typologies. It's been around for over 50 years, and it's so trusted that major universities use it to organize their majors. The ONET uses it to classify more than 900 careers, and our amazing workforce board here, and our CEOs in the audience here, Mr. Peter Karlstrom, uses the RIASEC to organize careers within each of our 7 priority sectors. So the magic in our work is not the deployment through counselors. It's the deployment through our amazing teachers, like Ms. Colan Dilgert over here, 4th grade ELA teacher at Forte Elementary, who is integrating the language of RIASEC, a self-reported model of realistic doers, investigative thinkers, artistic creators, social helpers, enterprising persuaders, conventional organizers, into the work that she does naturally in the classroom. And as students begin to make a connection between who they are, what their themes are through this agentic process, and make the natural connections that their craftsman of a teacher is making with what they are learning in the classroom, the students begin to develop a vision of their hoped-for possible selves. And that is an identity that can begin as early as kindergarten. When you pull in the parents, because this is ecosystem-wide and systemic, you get the parents, you get the teacher, and you get the child. And this work is not happening anywhere. All the kudos to the amazing teachers in Cajon Valley who are proving that this work not only is possible, but it's about high levels of engagement and high levels of identity building from the very earliest ages.
Language is key for students to understand and students to know, especially so they can advocate for themselves, kind of wherever they are. And Allelo does something really interesting by giving students a voice in a really interesting way. I'd recommend checking them out if you haven't before. Can you share how you launched Allelo and what gaps you noticed that needed to be filled and what Allelo does to do that?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So, right off the bat, when we're talking about student agency, it's all about meeting students where they are. And when we were creating Allelo, we built it under that same assumption. So we essentially created a discussion platform that we as students saw to improve upon a lot of the issues we saw with existing communication models. And this is before the pandemic. The discussion boards, these did not take into account the needs of the educators. They weren't fun for the students. And then it was only highlighted during the pandemic when we saw, the Zoom breakout rooms where 90% of the class has their cameras off, if not the entire class. So when we talk about meeting students where they are and where we are, that's text-based, right? Students are texting all day long, they're on social media, they are, in these chats in Discord, whatever it might be. So instead of trying to force students into this forum that they don't engage with, that they naturally turn off to, it's about meeting them where they're already communicating, and that is in a text-based form. So we created a platform focused on small group, text-based live synchronous discussions in order to really tease out every voice, not just the loudest one. Because when we talk about student agency, it can't just be for the students who are telling us what they want to do. It needs to be for every student who might not feel comfortable saying what they want to do.
Yeah, and, building confidence is key for students, right? That's something that ASA really looks into. And as we measure impactful programs, we're looking at student confidence and self-efficacy. In fact, a lot of partners of ours do that as well. Citizen Schools measures. They do a lot of really amazing SEL programs that connects to career learning, and one of their key indicators is self-efficacy for students. When students have confidence, they can take risks, so they're more likely to take classes that will be challenging, right? And they're more likely to voice their concerns or advocate for themselves. And so that kind of leads into my next question, which is kind of for the whole group. With programs like this, what shifts do you see for students? Do you see changes in student behaviors and in academic achievement? What does impactful career learning and centering students in learning do for students?
I think it's self-efficacy belief and outcome expectations as part of social cognitive career theory. So it's not just about knowing what I can do, but it's seeing what happens based on what I think and know I can do. Interests have the highest correlation to career success, performance, and income of any of the personality measures, and interests drive motivation, vigor, and persistence. So if you can unlock the interests of the individual, the human, again, back to the RISEC framework, vocational typology of interests, students begin to claim their interests, and then teachers are differentiating instruction in the classroom, providing projects based on students' interests. Then we go back to the model. Well, did we see motivation, vigor, and persistence? Did we see the goal-oriented behaviors through that process? And was the goal attained? That's the process. Self-efficacy belief, yes, and outcome expectations. Is it there? It's a rinse and repeat model that you can experience in your classrooms by focusing on interests.
I love that, and I think Ed's right on. It reminds me of a couple of practical things we saw as we implemented this program. And remember, this was a 100% virtual program where we had these 40,000 students, lots of teachers, lots of training along the way. But right off the bat, and I know Ed used this platform as well, this platform Nepris that allowed students to talk directly to industry was really critical because, as mentioned before, students, for all of you, when you had career day or your sons or daughters had career day, you would see a few parents come in who were doctors and lawyers, and the typical student in middle school knows how many career paths? 5, maybe 9, 4 or 5 deeply. And so having them talk directly to industry as a part of their exploration, we saw as critical. And it opened their eyes to a day in the life, a path toward a career they might have never heard of before, new job categories. I mean, Google has job titles developing every day that are different. And having students stay up to date in that was very important. So we thought they needed to have a vision of where they could be as a starting point, which is very, very critical. Secondly, in terms of career confidence, having them work in teams. So we had them work in Microsoft Teams, in collaborative software, working in groups, and we've all done group work, and we've seen them work on cases. Those who weren't as confident, whether it was their skill level, their communication ability, et cetera, were bolstered by the group because it was a shared goal, shared vision, et cetera, and most importantly, the authenticating that career-related exploration and work, going back to the industry. So having an industry professional listen to the group's presentation and say, that's very close to what we actually do in our profession, or you kind of miss this a little bit and maybe think about it this way. That authentication was also critical. So just imagine a middle schooler talking to industry, working in a team, presenting, reading out to their class, instructors, and professionals. That learning is invaluable, and the amount of confidence that's built from that experience in 8th grade, immeasurable.
And I would just add that, the biggest roadblock I hear when I'm talking to schools about career exploration in the middle grades is that we don't have time for one more thing. And I go back to our AMLE publishes the best practice text on middle grades and teaching young adolescents. And we say it isn't one more thing, it is the thing. The whole curriculum should be one of exploration. And so you're going to get increased satisfaction among both the educators and the students when you take this approach. And so that's why we jumped at the opportunity to partner with ASA on the career exploration in the middle grades playbook that we wrote with Ashley there. So, and featured a great case study, again, from Ed's team. So it is possible because it is what middle school should be.
Yeah, and if I can just kind of touch upon that, I think another common misconception is that, they're too young, and just to, on a kind of a personal note, my co-founders and I went to Carnegie Mellon, and there was a shooting 5 minutes away from our school 2 years ago, and we didn't organize these actions happening afterwards, the marches that occurred. It was middle schoolers and high schoolers. So, these kids know what they want. They know what they want to do. And it might change. I think there was 7 different jobs I wanted between 8th grade and right now. But they need to experience that for themselves and start at this young age like you're describing, in 8th grade, in high school, wherever it might be, because they're smart and, they're doing a lot.
Just one more thing. I think that the act of exploring, we talked about agency for this generation, and the act of that early exploration actually provides additional options. So, I think we're maybe out in the hall, we were talking about the fact that historically a student has this option or that option and nothing in between. But this type of exploration actually creates multiple options. And we're seeing, the research is showing that students are taking paths that we can't even predict today, and that's going to get even more pronounced. And so I love that increase of optionality for students when they graduate. And then secondly, if a student at least has a thought about the path they might want to take, it actually prevents, sometimes you get to college and you're doing your exploration while you're in college and while you're paying tuition, and that's really tough for the student and the parent and long term. So I think going in with an idea, more so than no idea, can help reduce debt. We were all talking about our college debt a minute ago as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So to talk about exploration and Daniel, to your point about middle school and high school students know, they're very aware of the global national issues that are out there. They're having serious conversations now. Key to that is bringing them into those conversations about how do you solve the world's problems, giving them case studies where They are challenged to think about some global issue, have them tackle climate change. So something else that AMLE and ASA collaborate on is ASA Solve Together, which is a challenge-based contest for middle school students to tackle real-world challenges through the lens of a career. So for climate change, like they have to think about like what could they do and what solution can they propose. Some of them build a colony on Mars as part of one of their solutions. So they think about space exploration. It's a really powerful way to bring students into conversations they really, really care about. And so something you were saying earlier, Shaun, about NEPRIS kind of leads to my next question. In a lot of panels I've seen over the last day or so, employers are always a conversation, especially when you're talking about high school and post-high school. But how else do we bring employers into student agency and career choice for students as young as middle school or elementary school? How can we do that?
Well, I think, no, in our schools, I got a lot of conversational topics on this one, but in our schools, we don't harvest our parents enough, right? So we got 16,000 students in our schools, right? Double that. Those are the parents and families, community that we have. We don't harvest them. The principals say, well, go find me someone from IBM or go find me someone from this, carpentry trades. And I'm like, so you have no carpenters of the 900 or 1800 family. You have no HVAC. You've got no one who's a scientist. You've got no one. So you want me to go all the way down the road, create a warm lead out of a cold lead, just to bring them in. What's their intrinsic motivation? Who are the families in your schoolhouse? And what are the tools that we can use to harvest those families and invite them in? How many times have you parents been invited to your kids' schools? I got 3. I've been invited once. Maybe it's because I talk too much. I don't know. And it was in kindergarten, and we did a career development lesson. Go figure, right? And that's what started some of this work. But let's start with our families. Let's invite, right, the Julia Freeland Fisher, the important work around loose ties and strong ties. And, right, they are the first strong tie. And the parents are the first career coach for the child. So imagine the parent and the child having this consistent language of interests, and then we're harvesting. And it also gives us an opportunity to teach something else. Hashtag dignity in all work, which we like to skip over. Dignity in all work. So I think we should start with the families. It's great to use these other tools, Road Trip Nation, NEPRIS, and the others. There's lots of them out there. But I think if we could start harvesting the relationships with our families first and focus on this, this important foundation of dignity in all work. Once you realize that all work matters, you realize that all people matter, then we start really building an understanding of ourselves and our place in the world.
I would also add that, in addition to your families, which are an incredible resource, and we saw the families get involved in our Solve Together student projects as well, so they're engaged in that also. But, the local, tie it into what your local community, does. So we just funded a project in Hawaii where the school is going to be partnering with the National Park Service, and the kids are going to be, interns there to learn about visitor services and about conservation and about all of these other things. So they're really leveraging the strengths of their community to build a not one and done event where they come in and speak and then they go, but instead something that's ongoing that really engages the students in that local community industry.
I've been really amazed over the years on the adult training side and also middle and high school where there's a skills gap. There are corporations that are willing to step in to start building an early pipeline, and we at Stride had invested in a company called Tallo. And Tallo's like a LinkedIn for high school students, and it's populated by employers and higher education. So students from age 13 can register in this ecosystem, and they've got access to all of these great companies and schools. And a company like Boeing actually has a well-defined middle and high school introductory program pipeline, but a lot of people just don't know about it. And so I think that there are industry representatives that are willing to engage. Sometimes it's tricky because these are minors, and so the company has to have a real well laid out program, et cetera. But I think that there are industry participants who are willing to engage with students and families to help in this regard. I don't think as a society we're doing it well yet. There are boundaries that we have to, work around, et cetera. But I think that the opportunity is great. And we were talking about it earlier, and I think that, we're still stuck in traditional paths. But once we can break out with, some of the innovative things that are going on, et cetera, I think we can make those connections a lot better.
Can I build on that? One stat, and I think Mr. Collister maybe could help just validate this, but 95% of the employers in San Diego County have 5 employees or fewer. Okay, 50 or fewer. So most of the employers that we have are mid-level or small. They may not even show up on your radar. They're not even on your radar. So that's why the families, our family members, are in those small to medium-sized businesses. And so that's why we can't just hinge on the things that IBM and P-Tech and all these other guys tell us. Sounds great, but it's not scalable. Not scalable. So we have to build these grassroots networks, right, Mr. Fishman, right? These grassroots networks, big picture learning, in order to be able to actually scale this for every child, every grade, every year. And if I get a child who wants to be a pastor, then I need to be able to help that child achieve his hope for or her hope for possible self, which isn't in a P-Tech pathway, and it's not in a Boeing pathway, it's not in the other pathway. That's not my job. My job is to help your child achieve their hope for future possible self in whatever it is that you and that child may want. That's volition, that's career choice privilege, and that begins with understanding the human first.
Absolutely. So we're at ASU+GSV, right? We're talking about EdTech kind of all day, every day for the next couple of days. So Shaun and Daniel, what gaps out there can EdTech kind of fill when it comes to student voice, agency, and choice? We touched on a couple different EdTech platforms out there, but how can we leverage EdTech to support this work?
Yeah, I can take that. I think when we're having this discussion, we're being very student-focused, which is extremely important, but to also rope the educator, into this, because that's, with EdTech Tools especially, that's where it really stems from. We're asking a Herculean level task of these educators to engage each and every student in the class at all times. And that sounds impossible, and it's been impossible for a very long time because we haven't had EdTech. And in order to truly have each student be involved and learning, that educator needs to understand where they're coming from, what their background is, what their goal is for learning, how they learn best. And for an educator to have 5 classes with 25 students every day, I can't imagine them being able to know that for each student. But luckily, nowadays, the platform that we built and that all these great people are building at this conference is EdTech is those tools and are those tools where educators can turn to get that individualized basis for every student, because that's when you can have an equitable classroom where I know every kid who's coming in, I get a report on them that shows, how they learn best, or, if they're an extrovert or an introvert or what it might be. And then you can tease out all those voices. So when we talk about agency, it's once again not the kid in the front who raises their hand every day. It's the kid in the back who it might be a little more nervous, or, a text-based platform like ours, for example, that's why we focus on that, is because, someone walked around to our booth today and they said the average student over the pandemic in an hour-long class participated 7 seconds per class. We have a text-based platform where students are participating on average 1 time a minute. And that's not because we have some, magical platform that I think it's pretty great, but it's because it's text-based and students love texting. And that's a simple equation. That's one area, but there's a lot of other areas where that applies too, especially what you guys are talking about, where it comes to, applying for jobs, et cetera. To me, growing up, that was so distant to me. But if we started at a younger age and really gave me and my peers more voice in that, I'm sure it would have been less mystified. So I think EdTech really pulls that all together and gives the tools to these educators to have a more equitable classroom.
I agree. I couldn't have said it better. I agree 100%. And that's exactly what we're working on, but on the corporate training side, whether it's starting with an assessment to see where each person is, and then identifying what their training needs are, applying that training in smaller pieces of content over, in episodes over time, and then making that training individualized for each person over time. That's all sort of critical, I think, in any kind of instruction, how we deliver instruction. But can we sort of make the hard turn to use technology that way in traditional lanes is the ultimate question. But I think technology can help if it's embraced the right way.
Yeah, and just think if we, previously we only had that standardized test data. We only knew children by their scores, but with data like that you're able to gather on our students, we know them more holistically. So how do we share this across our classrooms to make sure that we're responding to that whole child?
Do I get to respond to this one?
Go for it.
We have 130 million Americans that don't read beyond a sixth grade reading level, according to Gallup and the Barbara Bush Foundation 2020 paper. So if I was going to put all my effort of EdTech into one topic, it would be on literacy, reading. And it would be on things like understanding learning differences and dyslexia and how do we apply OG and Barton and all these other formats in order to be able to help every single young person read, prolifically read and communicate. We need to do that right now. We need to teach reading. Hey, universities, start teaching the students that you're sending out into our schools. Teach them to learn to teach reading at no matter what grade level they're going to be teaching when they get into our schools. So start with that, please. Universities, hello, are you out there? Please teach the student teachers how to teach reading and phonics in our schools so we don't have to teach them.
I agree wholly. I honestly think that basic literacy, basic computations are two of the key career skills that are necessary for success in a modern workplace, in any workplace. And I think way back to my dissertation, I really studied NCAA athletes and what made them successful, what the sort of spectrum between athletics and academics and their choices, et cetera. And we found that many, because of the rigors of their sport, didn't focus on literacy at the earliest of ages, because we are sports crazy society, and that starts at earlier and earlier ages, and the more students are on this side of the spectrum, the more they miss some of those basics. So I agree. I think all of our early efforts, if it's around career, should be that foundational in terms of literacy, basic computational math, et cetera.
And to bring it back to student choice, a great way to engage them in literacy is to let them choose, books that they're interested in. So that includes graphic novels and other newer forms of media that our middle school and high school kids are really interested in.
Absolutely. And something else about career exploration is that it's cross-curricular. Usually, ASA partners with a group of schools across Massachusetts, and many of those schools do STEM programs, which is really, really important when it comes to career exploration. But as a former reading teacher, you can do that with literacy. You can have students learn about careers and read about careers, or have them write about careers, like going back to case study or PBL, right? It's cross-curricular. Everyone can be on board. So, which kind of leads to my next question. How do we get buy-in from everybody at all levels in a district to career exploration? How do we make this a conversation and language for everybody in a district?
I love my co-panelists. Thank you so much for just everything you're teaching me and just the conversations. I really appreciate you all. So we went big bang in our district. 5 years ago, we integrated career development for every teacher and every grade. We're going to start with counselors. Thank you to our board president, Tamara Otero's here today, and two of my WOW coaches who are over here right now. They stepped out of the classroom to help do this work. But I think with the adults, because many of the adults have never experienced career development for themselves, you as adults have never experienced it for yourselves. Have you sat down and had a career development conversation with a coach, a career coach? When do you talk to you about your career? When was the last time you talked about your unique strengths, interests, and values, who you are and who you want to become? Right? It's a category grade process. It's a developmental process. It happens across the lifespan. It might be happening to some of you today. You're wondering. You've come here this morning and you're wondering, what am I doing with my career? Is this where I'm supposed to be? We need to give that gift to the adults in our schools as well. And so always use the airline analogy, right? If the airplane loses cabin pressure, a small mask will fall from the ceiling. Please apply it to yourself first before you apply it to others. Let's give the adults in our schools the gift of understanding who they are and maybe why they're doing what they're doing. Let's help them explore their unique strengths, interests, and values. Let's not just ask them to do this to the kids without experiencing it for themselves first as humans. That's the way that you start doing career development in schools. You honor the humans first. You honor the adults first. So in our school district, that's what we do. And there's probably lots of different ways to do it, but we want to honor the adults first.
Yeah, if I can interject, I think something I just graduated from school, so I saw a lot of like career, like next stages for a lot of my friends growing up, and I think that representation is a really important thing from a really early age, like from the student perspective of, oh, if I see someone who looks like me and sounds like me, I can probably do what they're doing. And I think even a more like practical part of that is the connections that people have in the world. Like I've learned now more than ever that, 2 years ago I applied to like 40 internships and I didn't even get a response from one of them. But then there was a connection I had at one place and I got the job the next day. And I think that's, like the systemic issue, or not issue, but opportunity in this country is, right now it's so much easier to get a job if you have an introduction at a place, to speak to someone, because, we're all nice people, but if you just read someone on paper, you don't get that same color than when you're talking to them in person. So I think, explaining that to kids from a really young age that just because someone, looks a certain way or that, it's really more about like you and your career and how you can get to that point.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversation here about schools, districts, and educators and how to bring them on board for career exploration. What does career readiness and student agency and voice and choice look like outside the classroom? What are opportunities are out there for students?
I think your workforce board is a great place to start. There's 550 workforce boards across the nation. That sometimes they're called one-stop, sometimes they're called career centers. We have the best in the nation out of the 550. San Diego Workforce Partnership. Get to know Mr. Karlstrom, and if you don't know your workforce board in your communities, ask him to help you get to know who it is in your community that serves. But they use WIOA funding to make it possible for every adult human that wants to get a better job.
And we're seeing lots of creative approaches like that. Like I was just visiting a charter school that has it's an entrepreneurial focused one. And so middle school students are literally running their own businesses during the day while they're also engaging in the curriculum. So I think there are lots of ways that we can break down that school building wall and really engage students with their actual lives.
I agree. Had the opportunity to work with the National Chamber of Commerce and their local outfits, and it was a pilot to determine how to get to work-based learning in a more effective way. And the interest is high. I think that there is amazing learning. Again, it's experiential. When you're working in, if you're a program and you're working in live code for a company, the learning is just much deeper than sort of reading a book and practicing your coding along the way. And so the more we can embed students of all ages in that kind of live environment, I think the learning is very rich.
And like real world experiences, apprenticeships, internships for middle schoolers is a thing. Like
Yes.
you can have another partner of ASAs is Apprentice Learning, which is Boston-based. They work with Boston Public Schools to set up apprenticeships for middle school students who either job shadow or do work for employers within Boston City. So those are opportunities for middle schoolers, and they're happening more and more. So that's another kind of way to encourage that and have them step outside the classroom for experiences.
I think it's a great opportunity. I think it needs to be encouraged. And the shift from Voc Tech and some of the biases around those programs to this sort of modern view of work-based training. I think we're still in that evolution. And it's a very important one. So the more we can all sort of embrace it, I think the better off we're going to be as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost coming up on time now. I think this might be our final question. How do we measure student agency, voice, and choice? And when we're talking about like student confidence and engagement, is that measurable? How do we do that? How do we measure outcomes in programs like this?
Yeah, I can take that because the biggest part of Allelo, our platform, is that exact, how do we not only engage students, but then extract from that for the educators, what to do with that, So we use AI in a lot of really exciting ways that provide objective feedback for the educators to then provide to their students. So when we talk about engagement, you need to look at it at a quantitative and a qualitative level. It can't just be, Jimmy was clicking space enter a million times, he was super engaged. It needs to be, how complex were his sentences, or, how positive was he being, how many new ideas did he bring up, or, the kid who never talks, now they're engaging in this discussion, you need to look at it from a lot of different angles, or then you just have a one-sided view for the educator to not really be able to build off of.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. Thank you to our panelists. We really enjoyed having the discussion of how we can center students in their own learning, helping them learn about the careers. A little plug for ASA, follow us because we've got some other student-centered learning and programs coming out later this year into next year. And thank you. Have a good rest of your day.